I'm not sure if you know this case, but I found it fascinating. On August 4th, 2006, a search engine similar to Google called AOL, which used to be quite popular, decided to publish the searches made by its users over a period of 3 months. To protect their users' privacy, they replaced usernames and emails with identification numbers. So, when accessing this document, no one could be identified. This went viral at the time, and thousands of people saved the documents. But this is where the drama started. Many people began to identify some users through certain searches that gave details about who they were. AOL, the company, realized what had happened, and 3 days later, on August 7, 2006, they deleted the document, but it was already too late. By that time, it had already been uploaded hundreds of times on other websites and blogs. AOL even said that their intention was for academics, meaning students, to have access to this document with real people's searches in order to conduct studies on people's behavior on the internet. But they didn't realize that this caused a huge uproar. Out of all the published users, the most disturbing was user 927, who started with rather significant searches. Moving on to searches that made it seem like this person could be dangerous to society. But before talking about this user, let's look at other users who were considered controversial or interesting. We're gonna talk about several users involved in this controversial case, because it wasn't just user 927 who was controversial. A lot more came to light when many investigators and journalists accessed over 20 million searches from AOL's platform. User 4417749 was one of the most controversial, because due to her searches, they were able to identify her by her full name. What happened with this story was that a journalist from the New York Times took on the task of writing an article about how to identify someone by looking at their AOL searches, to prove that this company's strategy could be dangerous. This journalist came across the searches of user 4,417,749 and in a short time was able to figure out that the user was a 62-year-old widow named Thelma Arnold, who lived in Georgia. Thelma had searched for things during that 3-month period that were neither strange nor disturbing. But it wasn't hard to paint a clear picture of her personality and find details about her personal life through her searches. Thelma had typed phrases into AOL like 60 single men, I can't feel my fingers, or dog that pees everywhere. At one point, she searched for landscaping companies in the city of LaVerne, Georgia, which made it easy to locate her. She also searched for her last name, the names of friends and family, medical prescriptions, topics related to her 3 dogs, and even her own full name. When the journalist was able to fully identify her, he traveled to Georgia, knocked on her door, and showed her what he had found. Thelma confirmed that she was user 4,417,749 and gave the New York Times permission to expose this AOL error and tell her story. The New York Times journalist said that he had been able to identify other people, but he didn't want to expose them because their searches were stranger, and Thelma's was basically the most normal one he found. In addition, it was confirmed that more than 657,000 people were exposed in this document. The Washington Post, which is another newspaper, did something similar. They were able to find a 55-year-old woman named Joan Whitman from the city of Grand Junction, Colorado, for the sole reason that she accidentally typed into the AOL search engine a complete order she had made online, which included her full name and address, which showed how dangerous it was to have published this document. The following case inspired an independent documentary series because it seemed like a person was using the AOL search engine as a personal diary of everything that happened to them. Another controversial user who also inspired the creation of a documentary series called I Love Alaska was user 711391. This person was never identified by name and surname, but was one of the users who attracted the most attention because their searches showed the feelings of someone who might not have been having a very good life. User 711391 made searches that identified her as a religious woman, around 45 to 55 years old, possibly going through menopause, and who lived somewhere in Texas. She spent most of her days watching television and using the computer, and apparently she was married to a man with whom she no longer had much intimacy or closeness. User 711391 searched for how to increase intimacy with their partner, topics related to that, and more content to find ways to cheer up and improve her life. The searches then became more personal. User 711391 started looking for men on the internet that she was in private contact with. Thanks to her searches, it was discovered that she cheated on her husband and that she felt remorseful. Because of this, she was going through deeper depressions and was constantly searching for ways to start over in Alaska. On May 31, 2006, the last searches associated with this user took place, where she looked up things like: having a lover is a waste of time. How do I let a man know that I'm independent, not to call that man? How to deal with a computer addiction. Cruises to the Bahamas are for poor people. People are not the same in person as they are on the internet. How to make a man desire you. It was because of this intensity that the documentary series was created, I Love Alaska, with 13 episodes, each one between 3 and 5 minutes long. And in this production, basically a narrator reads these user searches while the country's landscapes are shown. Now we're entering a more intense territory. The next user made such specific searches that many thought he could be the killer of a woman whose murder had not been solved. When the AOL document came to light, users started circulating the user's case. 5,342,598 because the searches this user made suggested that this person could be involved. In the case of Tara Marowski. Tara Marowski was a 21-year-old woman who lived in the city of San Jose, California. At the end of March 1983, she had been seen leaving a bar, and 5 days later, her partially clothed body was found in the backseat of her own car, her vehicle, which was parked on a residential street in that city. At the time, it was confirmed that her death was caused by strangulation, and she had also been sexually assaulted. Therefore, the authorities had DNA evidence from the perpetrator. But by 2006, when the AOL search scandal happened, the case was still cold. User 5,342,598. 598. Made searches so specific about this case that it seemed like he was looking for information about the murder to find out if the police were still investigating. By 2006, we have to mention that 23 years had passed since the murder, and also at the time of the AOL searches, it was the anniversary of this crime. Between March 27 and 28, 2006, this user opened a new AOL session to search for information about Tara Marowski. The first search was simply the victim's name, but he entered it 3 times. The next one was the unsolved murder of Tara Marowski, and then it was the phrase, the murder of Tara Marowski. A few minutes later, he searched the phrase, Tara Marowski found in a car, and then repeatedly searched the phrase, Tara found in car, more than 16 times. 2 months later, on May 25th, he opened a new AOL session where he did more searches with the name Tara Marowski. Searches related to a suspect named Edward Beaton were also found. The phrase said, Edward Beaton question about the murder, in addition to searching for the phrase, unsolved murders in San Jose. And that's important to keep in mind, which is why people thought this person could have been Tara's killer. Because this case wasn't famous. No documentaries were made. There wasn't any media coverage of this girl. It was an unsolved case, one of the many that never become popular. There wasn't much information other than what was mentioned at the time in the media, but it definitely wasn't a case that had reached the media enough for people to look for these phrases in 2006. That's why a lot of people started to get suspicious. But searching for the suspect's name was also striking. Although the media at the time talked about Edward Beaton, he ended up being ruled out as a suspect. It seemed like this person wanted to know more about the case for some reason. Theories about this user started to go viral. A large part believed that this was a real culprit, looking for information to see if they were still off the investigation's radar. But other users started to believe that this person was a bored woman at home, looking up crimes as a hobby. That would basically be me. And this was because there were signs of searches related to an alleged boyfriend, and searches about other crimes in the area. There was also the theory that it could have been a relative of Tara, or a friend of Tara, or someone who knew her, knew about the case, and was looking for information. But the mystery of user 5,342,598 was solved when they found the person responsible for Tara's murder. If you remember, the authorities had kept the DNA samples from the case, and in 2022, they were finally able to get a match. And that's how they determined that a man who was in prison for another murder, which also happened that same year, in 1983, but 4 months before Tara's in Palo Alto, was the culprit. And we're talking about Christopher Holland. He was 67 years old, and he was in prison for the murder of Cynthia Munoz, who was 18 years old. She had been found with signs of strangulation, stab wounds, and had been assaulted in her boyfriend's house, who, it should be said, was disabled in August of 1983. He was only in prison for this crime in 2007, and as I said, in 2022, he was officially linked to Tara's case. There are many people who also believe that possibly these searches were probably connected to this killer, to the convicted man. But it was discovered that at that time, in 2006, he was basically a vagrant. He was homeless. A person living on the street. He didn't have access to the internet, didn't have access to a phone, and was using drugs and committing crimes. Right? So, with that, the possibility that this user was this person or Tara's killer was ruled out. So, that left the majority theory, which was that it was a bored woman at home who was obsessed with cases from her city. Now let's talk about user 927. This person wasn't identified either, but they're probably the most infamous on this list because their searches started out normal. And as the days went by, this person's darker side started to show, to the point where you could even say it crossed into illegal territory. I'm not going to be able to read most of the searches because honestly they're very graphic and YouTube won't let me. They'll block the video, so I hope you understand. But you can look it up. You can find this search list on the internet. It's available. And I'm also going to cover the theories that came up after millions of people read these user searches. The first item in this document is dated March 1st, 2006 at 7:16 p.m. This first search was about Yoko Ono and a Japanese phrase that is "Anata daite yo," which appears in a Yoko Ono song from 1980 called Kiss, Kiss, Kiss. I imagine everyone knows Yoko Ono. She was the wife of John Lennon, and John Lennon was one of the members of the Beatles. And just like I said, everything started off pretty calmly. User 927 then searched for other artists, songs, song lyrics, and other phrases that were pretty normal. On that same date, minutes later, he searched for the word Bad Budweiser, Fall Out Boy, which is a band, and John Lennon. Apparently, the user disconnected at 19:25 and 40 minutes later started searching for other music, including Green Day. Now, 2 days later, on March 3, 2006, at 21:13, the searches began that made this case go viral. At least 23 times he searched for the phrase human mold, which means human mold. There are many theories about this specific search. Some believe that this user wanted to create a mannequin, which is why he searched for this phrase so many times. Others believe it could be something more innocuous or something related to a medical situation. After this, he started searching for phrases about bestiality, specifically with dogs. Later on that same date, he started searching for XXX content about abuse. That was just the beginning, because in the following 2 months, user 927 searched for phrases related to more intimate topics involving beings with whom such acts are illegal, from animals to minors. And as I said, showing these searches will only get me or the video blocked, because I can't even explain how intense it all gets. The first theory is that this profile came from a computer that was owned by a family, apparently made up of at least a father and a son. The mother was probably there too, but the father and the son were the ones who used the computer and who lived in the state of Colorado. The location part has to do with a search on a website from the government of the state of Colorado. And the part about it being a father and son was because there was content related to cartoons and children's games in some parts of the document, but the timing didn't match up. While one was searching for music, games, and more innocent words, the other would log in on different days making the disturbing searches we mentioned, which we can assume was the father. It's also believed that possibly this man's wife was pregnant because he had searched for that. And this painted a picture of a family that on the outside seemed ordinary. But apparently the husband, the father of the family, had very dark thoughts. The worrying thing is that he searched for the words incest and minors. If this theory is real, many agree that those children were in danger with this man. The second theory talks about a preteen, someone who went to his school and talked with his classmates about dark topics and then searched for them at home. And the theory comes from those shifts in the searches that sometimes seem innocent and then everything becomes much more intense. And there are people on the internet who claim that back then there wasn't much parental control and searching for things online was something everyone did, even when what they were searching for could be illegal. A question I asked myself when I saw this story, this case, is whether these searches were illegal, because they never looked for who the user was and why the user wasn't investigated. And I think there are two reasons. The first is that just because someone does a search in a search engine doesn't mean the person clicked on those links, and that's not illegal. Searching for those terms doesn't automatically make someone a criminal or mean they might have illegal content on their computer. So what is it? It's circumstantial evidence. And you can't build a case with circumstantial evidence. Obviously, this depends on the laws of each country, state, and city. The second thing is that AOL got hit with a lawsuit that cost them $5 million. So they kept the privacy of users who hadn't been identified yet. I'm not really sure who collected this money, but I imagine it was the few people identified by their full names. But if this was a class action, which is something that happens a lot in the United States, it could have been a collective lawsuit, where everyone who had an AOL profile during the period covered by those search records would receive a part of that total amount of $5 million. Once I tried participating in a Facebook class action and they paid me about $12 because this gets divided among millions of affected users. Yeah. Before ending this video, I want to mention other controversial users. There was a user number 17,556,639 who searched for how to kill his wife on at least 8 occasions. Then, during his lunch break at work, he searched for meats and cheeses. User 2,917,636 searched for information about having been abused. Apparently, it was a woman who, the day after what happened to her, started searching for these things. The number of people who search for illegal things related to minors and animals is what is most surprising in these searches. Hundreds of users were found with these search terms. And we'll finish with a funny one so this video isn't too heavy. On April 21, 2006, user number 704,868 searched for the following phrases: "I need to find my frog" and "How to call a frog in New Jersey." That's it for today's case. I want to read more from you to know what your theory is about user 927, or if you have any other theories out there. And with that, I'll see you in the next story.